Hey, it's Mark here, and welcome to the next edition of the Employee Survival Guide, where I tell you, as always, what your employer does definitely not want you to know about, and a lot more.
Welcome to the Employee Survival Guide, produced by Mark Carey, an employment attorney who has spent his nearly 30-year career fighting for employees just like you.
Right.
Today, we are tearing apart the real-world case of EEOC VR Systems, Inc., or ASI, as we'll call them.
Yeah, ASI.
ASI is a building contractor based in San Jose, California, and they employ approximately 500 employees statewide, and they're part of the EMCOR Group, Inc.
Which is a massive corporation.
Exactly. Traded on the New York Stock Exchange. They have armies of lawyers and HR executives whose sole job is to protect the company, not you.
Right. Their job is risk management for the brand, not the workers.
Exactly. So when they fired the employees in this case, the company thought they would just go away quietly.
Like they usually do, honestly.
Right. But the employees did fight back. And today we are going to look at the exact blueprints of their case.
It's a fascinating map of how to actually hold a company accountable.
It really is. By the end of the deep dive, we are going to show you how the plaintiffs in this case exposed the illegal racist behavior and retaliatory treatment they received.
And, won.
Yeah, won a $1.25 million settlement. So before we look at the intense factual details of this case and that massive settlement, if you are taking notes for your own situation, or if you just want to know how to protect your livelihood from corporate bullies, hit the follow or plus button on Apple Podcasts or Spotify right now.
It really makes a difference.
It does. It tells the platforms to keep sending you these survival tactics, and it helps other employees find the show before it's too late.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I want you to imagine something. Imagine you're standing in Cupertino, California, right around the spring of 2017.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah. You are looking at the construction of Apple Park. And you've probably seen the photos or the drone footage of this place.
Oh, yeah, the big spaceship building.
Exactly. The multi-billion-dollar shimmering spaceship of glass and green energy. It is an architectural marvel. It was literally designed to represent the absolute pinnacle of human innovation. A physical manifestation of forward-thinking utopian ideals.
The future being built right in front of us.
Exactly. It's the future. But I want you to hold that gleaming image in your mind, and then I want you to look straight down.
Okay.
Because right beneath your feet, occurring daily in the noise and the dust and the temporary structures of that very same construction site, was a reality that felt like it was pulled straight out of a bygone, deeply oppressive era.
A completely different world.
A completely different world. We are not talking about subtle microaggressions here. We are talking about severe racial slurs, swastikas, and literal nooses.
It's the visual and conceptual dichotomy is staggering.
Right.
I mean, you have a project that is meant to symbolize the apex of 21st century technology and progressive design.
Yeah.
And yet its foundation is being poured amidst an environment poisoned by some of the oldest, most visceral prejudices in human history.
It's incredibly dark.
It is. It's a stark reminder that, technological advancement does not automatically equate to sociological advancement.
Wow. Yeah, that is exactly it. And that jarring contrast is the very foundation of what we are unpacking today. We are opening up the actual unvarnished federal court documents to find out exactly how this happened.
The primary sources.
Always the primary sources. We have a huge stack for this deep dive. We've got the initial complaint filed by the federal government, the formal legal answer from the defense team.
Which is quite a read.
Oh, it really is.
Yeah.
We have the detailed case management updates, and ultimately the final consent decree signed by a federal judge.
Right.
So our mission here is to completely deconstruct the anatomy of a federal workplace discrimination lawsuit. We're going to trace step by step how daily ignored workplace indignities are allowed to mutate into severe physical threats.
And how the federal government eventually steps in.
Yes, exactly how the machinery of the government steps in to crush that behavior.
And I think this is vital for you, the listener, to understand, regardless of where you sit in the corporate hierarchy.
Absolutely.
Whether you're clocking in for your first day on a job site, or you're managing a team of hundreds, or sitting in an executive boardroom.
Yeah.
Understanding the precise legal threshold for a hostile work environment is not just like abstract legal trivia.
No, it's self-defense.
It is self-defense.
Right.
Knowing the exact mechanics of how a localized failure by a middle manager escalates into a multi-million-dollar federal consent decree That provides you with actionable knowledge.
Yeah.
Knowledge about your rights, your liabilities, and the true cost of just looking the other way.
Okay, so let's start by looking at the blueprints of this specific job site and the people involved.
Let's do it.
We need to introduce the Goliath, the entity that found itself in the crosshairs of the federal government. So Air Systems, Inc., or ASI, as we said, is the employer at the center of the lawsuit.
Right, the subcontractor.
Yeah. According to the legal complaint, they are a California corporation, and they provide a massive array of services: HVAC installation, architectural sheet metal, plumbing, commercial electrical services.
They do a lot.
They do everything. And they were brought in as a major subcontractor on the Apple Park project.
Which was a massive undertaking.
Oh, huge. But ASI isn't just a small, localized crew of a dozen people. Like I mentioned, they employ around 500 people statewide.
Yeah, they're part of a huge corporate ecosystem.
Right. But a company is really just an abstract legal fiction until you look at the human beings doing the actual labor.
Exactly. The lived experiences of the employees are what actually activate the law.
Right. So let's introduce the three specific African-American men whose daily reality on that job site forms the absolute backbone of the EEOC's case against ASI.
Good.
First, the documents introduce us to Moses Brown. He was an inside wireman apprentice who worked for ASI at the Apple Park site from June 2016 to August 2017.
Got it.
Then we have Kelly Glimpf, an electrician trainee who started his work there in February 2017.
Okay, so about 6 months later.
Yeah. And finally, Lewis Davis, an electrician who was hired in early 2017 as well.
It's crucial to ground ourselves in who these men are in the context of this massive project.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you have an apprentice, a trainee, and an electrician. These are men working in highly skilled, demanding trades.
Right.
They are attempting to build their careers, hone their craft, and earn their livelihoods on what was arguably the most high-profile construction site on the planet at that time.
Oh, easily the most high profile.
And they are bringing their technical skills to help build this modern marvel.
Yeah.
In return, the fundamental social contract, and more importantly, the explicit legal contract of the United States, dictates that they are entitled to a workplace where they can perform their duties safely.
Safely and without being targeted.
Exactly. Without being degraded or threatened based on their race.
So I want to pause on the nature of this specific workplace, though, because a massive construction site like Apple Park is not your standard cubicle farm.
Oh, far from it.
Right. It is practically a small, temporary city. You have hundreds of different subcontracting companies, thousands of workers in hard hats, shifting teams, constant noise, and overwhelming logistical chaos.
Complete chaos.
So my initial thought is about the dilution of responsibility. If you are a single subcontractor like ASI, operating in this chaotic sea of overlapping companies, how does the law view your specific responsibility to your specific employees?
That's the big question they always try to dodge.
Let me throw an analogy at you and see if this tracks.
Let's hear it.
If I rent an apartment in a massive high-rise and the shared lobby is constantly flooded, my specific landlord might say, well, I don't own the lobby and there are 50 other landlords in this building, so it's not my problem.
Right.
Does ASI get to make that same argument about a shared construction site?
That is a brilliant analogy, honestly, and it perfectly encapsulates the exact defense employers often attempt to use.
Do they?
Oh, all the time. But the federal courts, and specifically Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, reject that defense entirely.
Oh, really?
Entirely. Under Title VII, the chaos of a multi-employer job site is absolutely no excuse for failing to protect your workers.
Wow. Okay.
The law applies to employers with 15 or more employees, which ASI clearly exceeds with their 500-plus workforce.
Yeah, definitely.
And the mandate is incredibly strict. ASI has a non-transferable affirmative legal duty to provide a workplace free from racial harassment for its employees.
So they can't just point the finger at the sheer size of the operation.
Precisely. It does not matter if the racist graffiti was sprayed on a wall by a drywaller from Company X or a plumber from Company Y.
Right. Right.
ASI cannot throw up its hands and say, it's a huge site. We don't control everyone. What do you expect us to do?
Which is exactly what you'd expect them to say.
Of course. But the law says your duty is to your employee, regardless of the geographic or logistical complexity of the environment.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, if your employees are being subjected to a hostile environment, you, as their employer, are legally obligated to take prompt and effective action to protect them.
You can't just outsource your civil rights compliance.
Exactly. You cannot outsource it to the general contractor or just blame the chaos of the crowd.
So they own the environment their employees are forced to navigate.
Yes.
And sadly, according to the EEOC's complaint, that strict legal duty was allegedly breached almost the minute these three men set foot on the Apple Park site.
It was immediate.
Yeah. The documents outline an environment of pervasive hostility that started as, environmental background noise.
Right.
From June 2016 all the way to September 2017, which is well over a year.
A very long time.
Yeah. The portable toilets at the job site, specifically the ones in the vicinity where ASI workers operated, were allegedly filled with explicitly racist graffiti.
It's awful.
We are talking about the N-word scrawled on the walls, explicit drawings of nooses and swastikas.
We have to stop and really unpack the psychological reality of what that means on a daily basis.
Please do.
A portable toilet on a construction site is not a luxury, right?
No, it's a necessity.
It's an unavoidable biological necessity. It is a highly vulnerable enclosed space that every single worker on that site has to utilize multiple times throughout a grueling 10 or 12-hour shift.
Right.
To have that mandated space plastered with symbols of hate, genocide, and lynching symbols that are historically and specifically directed at your very identity.
Yeah.
That creates an inescapable daily hum of hostility. It is literally psychological warfare.
Designed to break them down.
Exactly. Designed to constantly remind these men, you are an outsider, you are not safe here, and you are viewed as less than human.
It is designed to degrade them in the most vulnerable moments of their day.
Yes.
But here is the detail from the EEOC complaint that I found absolutely staggering.
Uh-huh.
And it seems like the detail that really locked the legal trap around ASI.
What was it?
It wasn't just that the graffiti existed in a vacuum. The complaint explicitly alleges that ASI management admitted that they used these exact same portable toilets.
Oh, wow.
Yes. They admitted to federal investigators that they saw the offensive graffiti with their own eyes.
They admitted it.
And they took absolutely zero action to remove it, cover it up, or address it with the crew.
Yes.
They walked in, saw the swastikas and the slurs, used the facility, and walked right back out to supervise the site.
And right there is where we transition from a profound moral failure to a precise, actionable legal liability.
Okay, tell me more about that.
This detail introduces a foundational legal concept in employment law that everyone needs to understand.
Right.
It's the distinction between actual notice and constructive notice.
Okay, let's dig into the mechanics of that, because notice sounds like a simple word, but I imagine it carries a massive legal payload.
A massive payload, yeah.
If we go back to my flooded lobby analogy, how does notice work?
Well, let's use your analogy. Actual notice means the landlord literally, undeniably knew about the flood.
Right, like they stepped in the puddle.
Exactly. In this specific case, because the ASI managers admitted to using the toilets and seeing the graffiti, the company had actual notice.
Okay.
The corporation cannot claim ignorance because its designated agents, the managers, saw the violation with their own eyes.
Right.
But the law is actually designed to be even stricter than that. It provides a secondary safety net called constructive notice.
Meaning, what if they had lied? What if every manager claimed they had an iron bladder and never once stepped foot in those porta potties?
Exactly. Even if every single manager miraculously claimed total ignorance, the law applies constructive notice.
How does that work?
Because the racist graffiti was present on a daily basis for over a year in a highly trafficked, unavoidable shared facility, the legal standard is that the company should have known about it. It was so pervasive, so obvious, that any reasonable management team exercising even a basic level of oversight over their work environment would have discovered it.
So they can't just play dumb.
No. Therefore, legally, they are deemed to have been put on notice, regardless of whether they admit to seeing it or not. They do not get a free pass just because they chose to wear a blindfold.
That makes perfect sense. They can't weaponize their own incompetence or, willful ignorance.
Exactly.
But let me make sure I'm understanding the exact trigger for the lawsuit. It seems like a vital distinction. The company isn't getting sued just because some anonymous jerk drew a swastika, right?
That is the essential insight here. And this is the aha moment of how Title VII actually functions.
Yeah.
The mere presence of racist graffiti on a wall, while vile, is not the exact moment the massive federal liability is born.
Right.
The legal trigger, the precise moment the employer crosses the line into violating federal civil rights law, is their apathy.
Their apathy.
It is the failure to take prompt and appropriate corrective action to halt the harassment once they have that notice.
So inaction is the action.
Precisely. In the eyes of employment law, a manager's apathy is legally indistinguishable from active malice.
Wow, that's a powerful statement.
It's true. If an ASI manager had walked into that portable toilet, seen the graffiti, and immediately ordered it painted over, and then called an all-hands safety stand-down meeting to aggressively condemn the behavior and launch an investigation, their liability would be vastly mitigated.
Maybe even eliminated.
Potentially eliminated, yes.
Right.
The law requires a good faith effort to cure the hostility.
Right.
By seeing the hate speech and choosing to do nothing, the management essentially ratified the behavior. Their silence became an endorsement.
They gave it a green light.
They absolutely did.
And when you give hate a green light, it doesn't just stay quietly on the walls of the bathroom.
No, it spreads.
It emboldens the people who harbor those prejudices. And sure enough, the hostility mutated. It stepped out of the shadows and became direct, face-to-face confrontation.
This is where it gets worse.
Yeah, we see this escalation clearly in the timeline the EEOC laid out for April of 2017. Let's walk through these specific days. On April 7th, Moses Brown and Kelly Glimpf are simply having a conversation on the job site. A Caucasian coworker approaches them, interrupts their conversation, and aggressively asks them if they had just used the N-word.
It is an incredibly provocative, hostile way to inject oneself into the physical and conversational space of two Black colleagues.
Completely. Now, Brown and Glimpf deny it, obviously, and they specifically tell this coworker not to use that word.
Right.
But instead of backing off or apologizing, the coworker just starts repeatedly taunting them with the slur, right to their faces.
Unbelievable.
He even points at Moses Brown and says to Kelly Glimpf, "This boy just said the word."
Wow.
So Glimpf does exactly what every corporate HR manual tells you to do. He goes up the chain of command. He reports this direct racial harassment to not just one, but two ASI general foremen.
Right. He engages the formal machinery of the workplace.
Yes.
He is seeking the protection that Title VII guarantees him.
But the machinery was completely broken because nothing happens over the weekend.
Of course not.
On Monday, April 10th, the exact same Caucasian coworker does it again. He uses the slur right in front of Brown and Glimpf.
Because he knows he can.
Exactly. So this time, Moses Brown goes to an ASI general foreman to complain, and the EEOC complaint documents the exact quotes from these general foremen regarding how they responded to these men.
These quotes are hard to hear.
They are. To Moses Brown, the general foreman allegedly says, quote, "It's just a word. Does it really bother you?" End quote.
Just wow.
And later, regarding Glimpf's complaint from a few days prior, a foreman dismissed the issue entirely by saying he, quote, "could not picture the coworker as a racist."
Those responses are breathtaking in their legal and moral failure.
I have to push back on this, though, because reading those quotes, it just boggles the mind.
Yeah.
Are these foremen just profoundly, almost comically ignorant about the reality of race and the history of that specific word in America? Or is this active, insidious malice disguised as ignorance?
It's a great question.
And more importantly, from a legal perspective, does the civil rights law actually care about the difference?
Right.
Does the law distinguish between a boss who is secretly harboring racist views versus a boss who is just dangerously dismissive, conflict avoidant, and just wants everybody to get back to work?
You are hitting on one of the most complex intersections of human psychology and the law here. Intent versus impact.
Okay, unpack that.
And the law handles this brilliantly by completely ignoring the manager's internal psychological state.
Oh, it ignores it.
Yes.
Yeah.
The short answer is the federal government does not care what is in that foreman's heart.
Oh, okay.
It cares exclusively about his actions as an authorized agent of the employer.
So it's not about proving the foreman is a bad person?
Not at all. The law does not require a manager to be cartoonishly malicious.
Yeah.
You don't have to prove the foreman was twirling a mustache and actively cheering on the harassment to hold the company liable.
Right.
The law simply requires the manager to be legally compliant.
Which they weren't.
Which they absolutely were not. When an employee reports the use of a severe racial slur, a word that carries a unique, violent, and highly specific history of subjugation in this country,
Yeah.
dismissing it as just a word or asking, "Does it really bother you?" is a profound dereliction of the manager's legal duty to intervene.
Because it places the burden back on the victim to justify their trauma.
Exactly. And similarly, relying on a personal character reference saying, "Well, I can't picture him as a racist," is completely legally irrelevant.
It doesn't matter what he can picture.
A manager's personal, subjective assessment of the harasser's soul does not magically negate the hostile, objective impact of the harasser's behavior on the victims.
That makes a lot of sense.
Both of these managerial responses completely fail the strict legal requirement to take prompt, effective, and corrective action.
Yeah, they did nothing.
I really want you to sit with this concept. Think about how often subjective managerial opinions, phrases like, oh, he's a good guy, or he's just from a different generation, or he didn't mean it that way, are utilized as shields to protect and perpetuate hostile work environments.
It happens all the time.
Federal law explicitly rejects that defense.
Yeah.
Your comfort level with the harasser does not excuse the harassment.
That is a phenomenal breakdown. The manager's desire to avoid conflict doesn't trump federal civil rights law.
Exactly.
But here is where the timeline gets incredibly dark.
Yeah.
Because the management's failure to act wasn't just passive incompetence. It didn't just stop at, I can't picture him as a racist.
No, it escalated.
The timeline suggests it immediately morphed into active, swift, and brutal retaliation against the person who dared to complain.
This is the exact moment the legal jeopardy for Air Systems Incorporated goes from a significant problem to an absolute catastrophe.
Let's look at the sequence of events on that exact same day, Monday, April 10th, 2017. Kelly Glimpf has just reported the racist taunting for the second time. Later on, that exact same afternoon, the very same general foreman who took his complaint terminates Glimpf's employment.
The speed of that termination is what leaps off the page to any employment lawyer or federal investigator.
It's the same day. The official reason ASI provided for firing him was a reduction in force.
Which is such a corporate buzzword.
Right. They claimed officially that they just didn't need his labor anymore. On the very afternoon, he complained about severe, repeated racial harassment.
In the mechanics of employment law, we call this temporal proximity.
Temporal proximity.
Yeah, and it is a massive concept. When an employee engages in what the law calls a protected activity, which includes formally complaining about discrimination or harassment,
right,
and then suffers an adverse employment action like being fired or demoted or having their shifts cut, and those two events happen mere hours or days apart, the law creates a massive presumption of retaliatory motive.
It's like finding a smoking gun in the room seconds after a crime.
Exactly. It shifts the burden. It becomes incredibly difficult for an employer's defense attorneys to stand in front of a federal judge or a jury and try to convince them with a straight face that it was just a sheer, unfortunate mathematical coincidence.
That this supposedly objective reduction in force?
Right, that it just happened to land on the complaining employee on that specific Monday afternoon.
And there's a fascinating factual quirk in the documents that makes ASI's reduction in force excuse look completely fabricated.
Oh, this part is wild.
Right. ASI didn't actually permanently get rid of Kelly Glimpf. Because this was a unionized environment, in late June of 2017, just a couple of months later, Glimpf's union reassigned him back to ASI.
Yeah.
And ASI rehired him, putting him right back on the exact same Apple Park construction project.
Which completely vaporizes their own narrative.
How so?
Well, if you rehire the man for the same project a few weeks later, it proves his labor was not permanently unnecessary. It heavily implies that the termination was a punitive measure, a slap on the wrist designed to punish him for rocking the boat and costing the foreman their peace and quiet, rather than a genuine spreadsheet-driven economic necessity for the company.
Okay, so Glimpf is temporarily pushed off the board. Moses Brown is still on the site, deeply frustrated by the total inaction and watching his colleague get essentially exiled for speaking up.
It's got to be so demoralizing.
And this is where the documents introduce the role of the third plaintiff, Lewis Davis. He steps into the role of the bystander attempting to intervene.
A very dangerous position to be in.
Brown confides in Davis. He tells him the whole story. This guy is repeatedly using the N-word to my face. I took it to management, and they're doing absolutely nothing.
Right.
So Davis decides to step up to the plate. He goes to a general foreman to advocate for his coworker. He explicitly asks the foreman to address Brown's complaint about the racial slurs.
Which is incredibly grave.
It is. And nothing happens. So Davis, showing incredible persistence, goes back a second time a week later, practically begging the foreman to do his job and address the racial harassment on the site.
And still,
absolutely no action is taken.
We really need to extrapolate the implications of this, both from a psychological standpoint for the workforce and a liability standpoint for the employer.
Let's do the psychology first.
Okay, psychologically, think about what happens to the entire culture of a workplace when a sequence of events like this plays out.
Everyone is watching.
Exactly. The workforce watches everything. They see Glimpf complain, and they see him immediately lose his livelihood, even if it ends up being temporary.
Yeah.
They see the harasser walking around the site facing absolutely zero consequences. And then they see a third party, Davis, stick his neck out to do the morally right thing and advocate for a colleague, and he is treated by management as if he is invisible.
It breeds a profound systemic cynicism. It creates a culture of fear.
Exactly. It creates a sense of absolute powerlessness.
Yeah.
The message broadcasted to every single employee on that site is loud and clear. The bigots are protected here, and the victims and anyone who defends them are expendable.
Wow.
Why would anyone ever report a safety violation, a theft, or harassment to HR or management after watching that play out?
They wouldn't. It is the complete death of institutional trust.
It really is. And legally speaking, this sequence of events is a nightmare for the defense.
Why is that?
When the federal investigators at the EEOC look at a case, a single ignored complaint by one manager is bad enough.
Sure.
But when you have a scenario where multiple employees are having to repeatedly approach different levels of management, essentially begging them to enforce the most basic civil rights laws, and they are consistently met with a brick wall of apathy and retaliation,
Yeah.
that establishes what the law calls a pattern and practice of deliberate indifference.
A pattern in practice.
It moves the needle from, we had one bad manager who didn't follow protocol, to this hostility is a sanctioned feature of the corporate culture.
So the management effectively greenlit the behavior through their silence and their retaliatory actions.
Correct.
And this is the terrifying part about human nature. When you give hate a green light, it doesn't just plateau.
No, it never does.
It escalates. Because the perpetrators know there are no boundaries, the hostility mutated from verbal taunts into something genuinely physically dangerous. On July 10th, 2017, the environment reached a breaking point.
This is the critical juncture where the work environment shifts from being deeply offensive and legally hostile to tangibly perilous.
Tangibly perilous. Okay, so Kelly Glimpf is back on the job site after being rehired through his union. He is going about his work, and he makes a terrifying discovery.
Yeah.
Written on a sprinkler pipe in an area where he works is a direct, violent threat. I am going to quote the document, censoring the slur, but the intent is violently clear.
Prepare yourself, listener.
It read, F all N-words. They shall be hung like the N-words they are.
It's just horrific.
And right next to this explicit written death threat, a rope had been tied into a noose.
A profound and chilling escalation.
Moses Brown and Lewis Davis also saw the threat and the noose. The EEOC complaint takes the time to specifically highlight the psychological toll this discovery took on these men.
Of course it did.
It notes that this caused Kelly Glimpf to legitimately fear for his physical safety and the physical safety of the other African-American employees on the site.
Obviously.
It made him deeply, profoundly distrustful of the very coworkers who were supposed to be having his back on a dangerous construction site.
And we have to validate that fear because the context of the location matters immensely.
A construction site.
Right. A construction site like Apple Park is inherently physically dangerous under the best of circumstances.
Wow.
You rely on your coworkers for your literal survival.
They do.
You rely on them for safety checks, for clear communication, for ensuring a multi-ton load of steel doesn't swing the wrong way while you are underneath it. If you suddenly realize that someone on your immediate crew or someone operating nearby actively wants you dead and has taken the time to craft a physical symbol of murder to communicate that desire,
Yeah.
the psychological burden becomes unbearable. You cannot safely do your job if you are constantly looking over your shoulder, wondering if the guy holding the safety line wants to drop you.
Let's just pause and reflect on the timeline of this descent, because it is exactly what we promised to deconstruct at the top of the show.
Yeah, look at the progression.
We started with bathroom graffiti, a passive environmental hostility. But because management looked at it and walked away, it escalated to direct verbal taunts. A coworker feeling comfortable enough to hurl slurs directly into their faces.
Right.
And because that was ignored, and in fact, the victim who reported it was punished with a layoff, it escalated to a physical symbol of lynching and a written death threat.
A predictable escalation.
All while a company with 500 employees and massive resources allegedly did nothing to intervene.
This specific trajectory is a textbook definition of why early intervention by management is strictly legally required by Title VII.
Because it always gets worse.
Courts universally recognize a simple, grim truth about human behavior. Unchecked harassment always escalates. The aggressors test the fences. If the fence isn't electrified, they push further. It does. When an employer allows an environment to degrade to the point where nooses are being hung where their employees work, they have failed in their most fundamental baseline duty to provide a safe workplace.
It's no longer just a toxic place to work. It's a dangerous place to exist.
Yes.
And with the situation at this absolute breaking point, the employees finally took the step that altered the entire power dynamic.
They fought back.
They bypassed their broken internal HR system, and they brought the full weight of the federal government down on the employer.
This is where the machinery kicks in.
Let's look at how that actually happens in practice. We are moving from the dirty reality of the construction site into the sterile, high-stakes mechanics of the legal system.
Okay, let's walk through the timeline.
Let's trace it using the source documents. Brown and Glimpf take the crucial first step. They file formal, timely charges of discrimination with the EEOC. They document everything that happened to them.
Which is the essential trigger for everything that follows.
The government can't read their minds.
Right. The federal government, massive as it is, cannot act if it doesn't know the violation is occurring. The employees have to initiate the process by formally raising their hands.
Right. And once they file those charges, the massive wheels of federal bureaucracy start turning. The EEOC doesn't just take their word for it, they investigate.
Thoroughly.
And in June of 2019, the EEOC issues what are called letters of determination. These official letters state that the EEOC has found reasonable cause to believe that ASI actually violated Title VII of the Civil Rights Act.
We need to explain how heavy that term is.
Please do.
Reasonable cause is a significant legal and procedural hurdle. It means the EEOC didn't just glance at a form. Their federal investigators actively looked at the evidence.
They dug in.
Oh, yeah. They likely requested emails, reviewed the timeline of Glimpf's termination and rehiring, looked at photographs of the graffiti in the noose, and interviewed witnesses under the authority of the federal government.
And they found enough to move forward.
Yes. After all that, the agency formally concluded, yes, there is enough credible evidence here to say that a federal law was broken.
So the game changes.
Completely.
Yes.
This single letter shifts the entire posture of the dispute. It is no longer just 3 employees complaining to a dismissive foreman. The United States government is now officially backing the employees' claims.
Wow.
The Goliath suddenly has to fight an even bigger Goliath.
But the fascinating thing about the EEOC is that they don't just immediately run to the federal courthouse, file a massive lawsuit, and hold a press conference, do they?
No, they don't.
There is an intermediate step.
There is, and it is a really important mandated structural element of how the EEOC operates.
Mm-hmm.
By law, Title VII requires the EEOC to attempt to resolve the issue informally with the employer before resorting to the nuclear option of federal litigation.
And what's that called?
This mandatory process is called conciliation.
Okay, let's unpack conciliation because it sounds like a very polite word for a very tense situation.
Very tense.
Let me try another analogy. Is conciliation sort of like a legal quarantine?
Okay.
The government pulls the employer into a closed room, shows them the massive bomb they are about to drop on them in public court, and offers them one final chance to defuse it privately before the blast radius destroys their public reputation.
Legal quarantine is a fantastic way to conceptualize it.
Yeah.
Yes. What happens in that room is essentially a high-stakes, closed-door negotiation. The EEOC presents their findings, the reasonable cause, to the employer's executives and their lawyers.
They lay their cards on the table.
Exactly. They essentially say, look, we have investigated and we believe you broke the law. Here's the evidence of the noose, the slurs, the retaliation.
Undeniable stuff.
Right. And they say, before we drag your corporate name to the public record of a federal court, make this right. Pay the victims appropriate damages, change your broken policies, discipline the managers who failed, and agree to let us monitor you.
So it's an ultimatum.
It is. The dual goal is to provide swift, appropriate relief to the victims without the trauma of a trial, and to get the company to reform its practices without the taxpayers funding years of expensive litigation.
It sounds totally logical, like a win-win, really.
In theory.
But looking at the timeline in our documents, that specific meeting went terribly.
Oh, it failed instantly.
We have the date, July 2, 2019. The EEOC convened an in-person conciliation conference with ASI's authorized representatives and their legal counsel.
Right.
But the very next day, July 3, 2019, the EEOC sends a formal letter declaring the conciliation efforts, quote, unsuccessful, futile, and non-productive.
They did not mince words.
They literally shut the door after one day and stated they would make no further efforts to talk this out. What exactly does it take for the federal government to look at a company and call a negotiation futile after just 24 hours?
It generally means the employer walked into that room and completely stonewalled the government.
It's just flat-out denial.
Yeah, there are a few ways this happens. Either the company's lawyers aggressively refuse to admit any wrongdoing whatsoever, perhaps still clinging to that defense that they couldn't control the job site.
It wasn't us, defend.
Right. Or they offered a financial settlement that was so insultingly low that the EEOC realized the company was not taking the severity of the findings, a literal noose and same-day retaliation, seriously.
Like offering a few $1,000 to make it go away.
Exactly. When an employer acts in bad faith or displays utter delusion about their liability during conciliation, the EEOC does not waste time haggling.
They just pull the plug.
They issue that letter of futility.
Mm-hmm.
And legally, that letter clears the final procedural hurdle for the next step.
And the next step is the hammer dropping.
The big one.
The quarantine ends and it goes public. The EEOC officially files the federal civil rights lawsuit in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California. And when you read the actual complaint, specifically the prayer for relief, which is the section where the plaintiff lists exactly what they are demanding the federal judge to order,
Yeah.
the demands are staggering. They're not just asking for a corporate apology or a minor fine.
Not at all. When the conciliation fails, the EEOC brings out its full arsenal.
Let's list exactly what the federal government demanded on behalf of Brown, Glimpf, Davis, and any other similarly situated African-American employees who might have suffered in silence.
Let's go through them.
First, they demanded permanent injunctions against ASI. This means a literal court order legally barring the corporation from ever allowing this type of environment to exist again.
Okay, so that's step one.
Second, they demanded court orders forcing ASI to institute entirely new, federally approved policies for equal opportunity to actively eradicate the lingering effects of their past practices.
They are essentially asking a federal judge to step in and rewrite the company's internal HR manual and reporting structures from the ground up because the existing ones were proven to be broken.
Exactly. Third, they demand compensation for past and future pecuniary losses. This means actual, calculable out-of-pocket money lost by the employees.
Things like job search expenses if they were laid off.
Right. Or medical and psychiatric expenses if the severe stress caused health issues.
Yeah.
Fourth, they demand compensation for non-pecuniary losses. This is often the massive number. Damages for the subjective pain, suffering, loss of enjoyment of life, severe anxiety, stress, and humiliation caused by working under the threat of a noose.
Right, the emotional toll.
And finally, the most aggressive demand, punitive damages. The EEOC demanded ASI pay punitive damages for their, quote, malicious and reckless conduct.
We need to explain why punitive damages are so terrifying for a corporation.
Okay, lay it out.
Pecuniary and non-pecuniary damages are compensatory. They are about trying to make the victim whole, returning them to the state they were in before the harassment.
Right.
Punitive damages are entirely different. They are not about the victim at all. They are about punishing the company.
Punitive punishing.
Exactly. They are designed to hurt the corporation financially so severely that they and every other company reading about the case in the news never dare to engage in this behavior again.
Making an example out of them.
Yes. To get them, the EEOC has to prove that the company acted with reckless indifference to federally protected rights.
Which they had plenty of evidence for.
Given the ignored noose and the instant retaliation, the EEOC clearly felt they had the ammunition to prove exactly that.
So put yourself in the shoes of ASI's executives. You have just had a massive federal lawsuit dropped on your desk, publicizing the racist graffiti and the noose, demanding potentially millions of dollars, and demanding that a federal judge take over monitoring your workplace.
It's a bad day at the office.
It's a terrible day.
Yeah.
How does a massive corporation, backed by an army of high-priced lawyers, respond to that level of threat? This leads us into the final act of the case, Let's look at the document filed in February 2020.
The answer to the complaint.
Yeah. It was filed by Littler Mendelson, PC, which is one of the largest, most formidable corporate employment law firms in the world representing ASI.
Very heavy hitters.
And in this formal answer, ASI doesn't just deny the allegations. They ask the judge to dismiss the complaint entirely with prejudice. And here's the kicker. They actually asked the federal court to order the EEOC, the federal government, to pay ASI's attorney's fees for having to defend the case.
It takes a breathtaking amount of nerve.
Right. So I have to ask you, looking at the mechanics of this, is asking the plaintiff who is suing you with photographic evidence of a racially hostile work environment involving literal nooses to pay your expensive corporate legal fees.
Yeah.
Is that just standard legal posturing? Is it just a lawyer's poker face? Or is this a sign of total aggressive institutional denial by the company?
It is a fascinating look at the mechanics of litigation. It is almost entirely procedural posturing, but it is the most aggressive form of it.
Explain that.
In civil litigation, the initial answer to a complaint is a very specific, almost ritualistic type of document. The defense lawyers are legally required to respond to every single numbered allegation in the complaint.
Yeah.
If they admit to anything at this early stage, they instantly lose leverage. So the standard playbook for a firm like Littler Mendelson is to construct a procedural shield wall.
A shield wall.
Right. They issue blanket denials of the facts. They assert every single possible affirmative defense they can think of, even ones that might seem contradictory, and they ask the court for the moon, including having their massive legal fees paid.
It's throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks.
Exactly. It's a defensive mechanism designed to preserve all of their legal options down the road. It's the necessary procedural dance that happens before the terrifying reality of discovery sets in.
Discovery. When the skeletons come out.
Right. Which is the phase where the defense actually has to hand over internal emails and where the foremen have to sit for depositions under oath. The aggressive answer is designed to project strength and force the parties to the negotiating table before those depositions happen.
They come out swinging, hoping to intimidate the plaintiff into dropping the case or settling for pennies.
Yep.
But you can't exactly intimidate the federal government by threatening them with legal fees.
Precisely. The EEOC has effectively endless resources compared to a private plaintiff, and they've already found reasonable cause. The corporate posturing only lasts until the sheer mathematical weight of the evidence becomes too terrifying to defend in a public trial.
And that mathematical reality clearly set in because we jump forward to the summer of 2020. The aggressive posturing abruptly stops.
Reality bites.
It sure does. The parties agree to bring in an outside mediator, the Honorable Maria Elena James, a highly respected retired judge. They hold 2 heavy mediation sessions in July.
Mediation is the crucible where the posturing evaporates and the cold, hard math begins.
How so?
The environment in that room is intense. The company's defense lawyers have to look objectively at the evidence they know the EEOC possesses. The photographs of the graffiti, the timeline proving the retaliatory firing, the foreman's own admitted quotes.
Yeah.
And then they have to calculate the risk of 12 regular citizens on a jury seeing that evidence.
A jury seeing a photo of a noose.
Exactly. A corporate lawyer knows that if a jury sees a corporation ignoring a noose on a job site, the jury won't just award lost wages. They will award astronomical, headline-making, punitive damages.
Right.
The defense does the math, factors in the cost of years of litigation and the catastrophic public relations hit, and they advise the company that it is vastly cheaper and safer to swallow their pride and settle.
And that brings us to the climax of this entire legal journey.
The resolution.
On August 19, 2020, the parties submit a joint case management statement announcing they have reached a settlement. The very next day, August 20, Judge Lucy H. Coe signs the consent decree.
Which is the final word.
This is the document that finalizes that massive $1.25 million settlement we discussed.
A huge amount.
But I want to look closely at the final legal terminology used in this decree, because it's important to understand how these cases actually end. The decree explicitly states that the lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. But in the very same document, it also says the federal court retains jurisdiction to enforce the terms of the consent decree.
Let's break those two concepts down, because to a layperson, they seem entirely contradictory.
Yeah, they do.
But in the machinery of the law, they work together perfectly to create a resolution. Dismissed with prejudice means that the EEOC's specific lawsuit regarding these specific events is permanently closed.
Okay, closed forever.
Right. The EEOC cannot take the settlement money today and then turn around tomorrow and file the exact same lawsuit against ASI for the events of 2017. It provides necessary finality for the company. The specific legal battle is over.
The company bought their piece.
Exactly. They paid $1.25 million to close that specific file. But the second part, retained jurisdiction, is where the true teeth of the settlement lie.
Okay, tell me about the teeth.
A consent decree is not just a private gentleman's handshake agreement to do better. It is essentially a highly detailed, extremely strict contract that is actively monitored and enforced by a federal judge.
Wow.
If ASI agrees in this decree to pay the money, institute rigorous anti-racism training, and completely overhaul their HR reporting structures, the judge is keeping this file open on her desk for the duration of the decree, which is usually several years.
So they're on probation. What happens if they slip up?
If ASI fails to implement the trainings or if they retaliate against another employee, the EEOC does not have to start a whole new years-long lawsuit from scratch.
They skip the line.
They don't have to go through investigations and conciliation again. They just go straight back to Judge Coe's courtroom and say, Your Honor, they breached your decree.
And then what?
And the judge has the immediate power to hold the company in contempt of court, issue massive daily fines, or force compliance by any means necessary.
That's incredible power.
It is a brilliant legal mechanism because it ensures the company actually changes its institutional ways under the constant looming threat of immediate judicial punishment.
It is the ultimate accountability mechanism. It doesn't just punish the past. It forcibly engineers a better future for the next apprentice who walks onto that site.
It does. It essentially transforms the corporate culture by federal mandate.
Which brings us to the end of this incredible timeline. Let's pull all of this together and connect it back to you, the listener.
Yes.
We have just taken a massive journey through the hidden architecture of a civil rights battle. We started with an apprentice, Moses Brown, walking into a portable toilet and seeing racist graffiti.
And we tracked that exact thread.
Right through ignored complaints, through a retaliatory layoff, through a literal death threat, all the way to a federal judge signing an order that fundamentally changed how a 500-person corporation operates, forcing them to pay out $1.25 million.
It's a huge victory.
The absolute key takeaway from understanding this anatomy is this. You must document everything.
Everything.
You must understand that inaction from your HR department or your management isn't just frustrating. It isn't just a sign that you have a lazy or toxic boss. In the eyes of the law, their apathy can be a severe, actionable legal violation.
Exactly. When management fails to act, they're unwittingly building the legal case against themselves. But the system only works if it is activated.
Right.
It requires the employee to have the courage, the persistence, and the knowledge to force the issue, to document the failures, and to escalate it to the appropriate authorities, just like Glimpf, Brown, and Davis did.
Exactly. Their persistence changed the reality of that workplace. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a deeper, perhaps more philosophical question to mull over as you navigate your own careers.
Let's hear it.
It's a practical question about the very limits of the law itself. We know the specific legal case was successfully settled. We have a signed consent decree. The $1.25 million has been paid. The new federally approved policies are written in the employee handbook.
Right.
But a legal document, no matter how strict, doesn't instantly erase bias from a human brain.
It certainly does not. A judge's signature doesn't magically rewire the neurons or erase the prejudices of the foreman and the coworkers who are still clocking in on that site every morning.
Right. So here's the question for you to consider. When a company has allowed a culture of racial hostility to fester so deeply to the point where employees feel comfortable hanging literal nooses on a job site while management looks the other way, how does corporate leadership go about genuinely rebuilding trust the day after the lawsuit ends?
It's a daunting thought.
Can a court order actually mandate human decency and respect? Or does a consent decree merely force the bigots to hide their tracks better? How do you actually heal a workplace after a fracture that deep?
That is the enduring, complex challenge of modern management. The law can force compliance through financial terror, but it cannot mandate a healthy culture.
No.
That requires an entirely different kind of leadership, one that goes far beyond what a federal judge requires on paper.
It's something to think about whether you are the one reporting the issue or the one receiving the report. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material.
It's been a great conversation.
We hope you feel a little more equipped, a little more aware of your rights, and ready to keep questioning the reality of the world around you. Remember your own value, document your reality, and we will see you on the next deep dive.
If you like the Employee Survival Guide, I'd really encourage you to leave a review. We try really hard to produce information to you that's informative, that's timely, that you can actually use and solve problems on your own and at your employment. So if you'd like to leave a review anywhere you listen to our podcast, please do so. And leave 5 stars, because anything less than 5 is really not as good, right? I'll keep it up. I'll keep the standards up. I'll keep the information flowing at you. If you'd like to send me an email and ask me a question, I'll actually review it and post it on there. You can send it to mcarey@capclaw.com. That's capclaw.com.